My name is Crystal Carter, and I am a volunteer researcher with Telling Our Stories, Finding Our Roots. I am the daughter of Cordell Chin and Donna Chin of California, and my father was in the military for 20 years, and my grandfather, Malachi, served in World War II.
So, when were the GIs here?
Well, we know that there were a number of battalions that were based here between 1943 and 1945 in the run-up to D-Day. They came as part of a general sort of American operation that was based in Exeter. The west side of the river was for black soldiers only, and that the other side of the river was for white soldiers. And the U.S. military placed MPs, military police, on either side of the bridge to make sure that no one crossed. So there was a black GI MP on one side and a white GI MP on the other side. And according to Exeter residents, there were regular arguments and confrontations between the two sides and at the sort of bridge mark.
And what did the people of Exeter, what did they make of all this?
Well, since I've been doing my research, it's been really interesting because a lot of people don't know that this happened. A lot of people don't know that there was ever segregation in Exeter, that there were ever racial issues like this in Exeter. And some people might think, well, that's just something that happened with the U.S. Army, but local people did get involved and were affected by the situation. So when Joe Louis, the heavyweight champion of the world at the time, came to Exeter, he was denied access to certain pubs. He wasn't allowed in.
Why is this story important for Exeter?
Local people local people fell in love with these soldiers and made friends with these soldiers and invited them to tea, and these were reciprocal relationships, and this was welcomed by Black GIs, and Walter White, who was secretary of the NAACP. When he came to England, he noted that this was one of the things that kept their morale up throughout this very trying time.
Are there any other places that are particularly important in this story?
County Ground is bordered by a place called Tin Lane. And it was called that because, and during World War II and up until fairly recently, it was a lane that had corrugated iron all the way along the side, and it's a very small lane and things. But there are stories of the soldiers, some of the first encounters with the Black GIs, where they would sort of peer over the side and look down and see what was going on. And so people remember seeing them there. There's also lots of stories where there would be lots of carryings on between the soldiers and local girls. The cattle market had become a food depot for the U.S. operations throughout Exeter. And so they ran this cattle market as the food depot, and there are stories where people remember meeting them, and there's a story of a farmer from Exmouth going to the cattle market and meeting these Black GIs and tipping his hat to them, and them giggling because this was such an unusual situation. And this was one of the first times this was the first time that this particular farmer had ever met a black person.
And what about Wanford Hospital?
It was interesting because the U.S. Army had a policy of segregation which included hospitals. And so there were situations where you would have hospital wards that were segregated. So you'd have white soldiers in one part of the hospital and black soldiers in another part of the hospital. In Exeter, the U.S. Army took over Wanford Hospital as their hospital for their operations, and they had a hospital detachment of patients that was based at County Ground for some time. That was for the black soldiers, so the black soldiers weren't allowed in Wanford Hospital.
And what's the legacy of these GIs?
So-called brown babies in Exeter, as of 1945, they estimated that there were 83 children that were born at the RD&E that were born to black soldiers. Now, I read one memory of these soldiers where someone said that they remembered that there were lots of brown babies, as they were called, who came about after the war, and then after a while they all disappeared. This woman said, and she said, I wondered if they'd all gone back to the U.S., but that's very unlikely because mixed race marriages were illegal in about 20 states at the time. So that wouldn't have been the case. And there's also the situation where the U.S. Army had a policy of not allowing black soldiers to bring back their sweethearts in the same way that they allowed white soldiers to bring back their war brides after the war. So a lot of children ended up in care. But a lot of children became part of the UK and became part of the fabric of the UK. And so that is one of the legacies. So I know that there are a few people in Exeter that are children of the Black GIs.